Good morning, Tui. Hope you've had a lovely half term and have had a chance to enjoy the lovely weather. Unfortunately, not such good weather today, but I hope you've had a great time and it's great to be able to catch up with you guys too. I've posted some things this morning directing you to White Rose, and there's some examples on that dojo post. So looking at things to do with collecting and displaying data. Mrs. Harvey has been posting things through the week for you to do too, so well done if you've been joining in with those as well. So I'm going to try and read a few more chapters each week of James and the Giant Peach so that hopefully we can get it finished before the end of term. So I think we're up to chapter 10. Okay, so in chapter 9, James had just found a hole in the side of the peach. So let's find out what happens next. Chapter 10. It was quite a large hole, the sort of thing an animal about the size of a fox might have made. James knelt down in front of it and poked his head and shoulders inside. He crawled in. He kept on crawling. This isn't a hole, he thought excitedly. It's a tunnel. The tunnel was damp and murky, and all around him there were curious, bittersweet smells of fresh peach. The floor was soggy under his knees, and the walls were wet and sticky, and the peach juice was dripping from the ceiling. James opened his mouth and caught some of it on his tongue. It tasted delicious. He was crawling uphill now, as though the tunnel were leading straight towards the very centre of the gigantic fruit. Every few seconds he paused and took a bite out of the wall. The peach flesh was sweet and juicy and marvellously refreshing. He crawled on for several more yards, and then suddenly, bang! The top of his head bumped into something extremely hard, blocking his way. He glanced up. In front of him there was a solid wall that at first seemed as though it were made of wood. He touched it with his fingers. It certainly felt like wood, except that it was very jagged and full of deep grooves. "Good heavens," he said, "I know what this is. I've come to the stone in the middle of the peach." Then he noticed that there was a small door cut into the face of the peach stone. He gave it a push. It swung open. He crawled through it, and before he had time to glance up and see where he was, he heard a voice saying, Look who's here!" And another one said, "We've been waiting for you." James stopped and stared at the speakers. His face was white with horror. He started to stand up, but his knees were shaking so much he had to sit down again on the floor. He glanced behind him, thinking he could bolt back through the tunnel the way he had come, but the doorway had disappeared. There was now only a solid brown wall behind him. Chapter 11. James's large frightened eyes travelled slowly around the room. The creatures, some sitting on chairs, others reclining on a sofa, were watching him intently. Creatures, or were they insects? An insect is usually something rather small, is it not? A grasshopper, for example, is an insect. So what would you call it if you saw a grasshopper as large as a dog? As large as a large dog. You could hardly call that an insect, could you? There was an old green grasshopper as large as a large dog sitting directly across the room from James now. And next to the old green grasshopper there was an enormous spider. And next to the spider there was a giant ladybird with 9 black spots on her scarlet shell. Each of these was squatting upon a magnificent chair. On a sofa nearby, reclining comfortably in curled up positions, there were a centipede and an earthworm. On the floor, over in the far corner, there was something thick and white that looked exactly as though it might be a silkworm. But it was sleeping soundly, and nobody was paying attention to it. Every one of these creatures was at least as big as James himself, and in the strange greenish light that shone down from somewhere in the ceiling, They were absolutely terrifying to behold. "I'm hungry," the spider announced suddenly, staring hard at James. "I'm famished," the old green grasshopper said. "So am I," the ladybird cried. The centipede sat up a little straighter on the sofa. "Everyone's famished," he said. "We need food." 4 pairs of round, black, glassy eyes were all fixed upon James. The centipede made ringing movements with his body as though he were about to glide off the sofa, but he didn't. There was a long pause and a long silence. The spider, who happened to be a female spider, opened her mouth and ran a long black tongue delicately over her lips. "Aren't you hungry?" she asked suddenly, leaning forward and addressing herself to James. Poor James was backed up against the far wall, shivering with fright and much too terrified to answer. "What's the matter with you?" the old green grasshopper asked. "You look positively ill." "He looks as though he's going to faint any second," the centipede said. "Oh my goodness, the poor thing," the ladybird cried. "I do believe he thinks it's him that we are wanting to eat." There was a roar of laughter from all sides. "Oh dear, they said. "What an awful thought." "You mustn't be frightened," the ladybird said kindly. "We wouldn't dream of hurting you. You are one of us now. Didn't you know that? You are one of the crew. We're all in the same boat." "We've been waiting for you all day long," the old green grasshopper said. "We thought you were never going to turn up." "I'm glad you made it." "So cheer up, my boy, cheer up," the centipede said. "And meanwhile, I wish you'd come over here and give me a hand with these boots. It takes me hours to get them off by myself."